What is chronic Shaoyang? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Sounds like a bit of a weird thing. You might not have even heard of it before, but it's a part of classical Chinese medicine, and we're going to talk about what it is and how you can work out if you have it and what you can do about it as well. I'm a Chinese herbalist, an acupuncturist, and a person that makes videos on YouTube. And I'm really excited to have you on the channel. Thanks so much for your support. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. There's a little button there, say subscribe. Just click that and all your dreams will come true. And so, well, my dreams might come true. So click that subscribe button and let's go on the journey of understanding what is Shaoyang. So in Chinese medicine, you have different systems of Chinese medicine. So you might have heard me talk about classical Chinese medicine before. What that is, it's the foundational understandings of what is now called TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine. So TCM is more like, it does incorporate what classical Chinese medicine is, but it's kind of incorporating other styles and other things that have kind of come out of that or been expanded upon or changed and things like that. There's a bit of a resurgence to come back to this idea of these classical understandings. And these divisions or levels of our body were described by a practitioner back in the Han Dynasty called Zhang Zhongjing. Sounds like a very rhyming name. So Zhang Zhongjing was a practitioner who wrote a textbook called the Shang Han Lun. Now, rather than getting into big details about what that is and bore you with those details, and the video will be very long if we do, we'll just kind of cut through some of this stuff. So I'm not going to explain every single thing about this. And some people say, oh, Marie, you never get to the point of the video. It's because there's just so much to know. There's so much to know in Chinese medicine. So what he described in this book was levels of like yang in our body, essentially. That's one way of thinking it. So you have Tai Yang, which means Tai in Chinese means big. And obviously yang just means yang, like yin and yang. And yang is the function of our body. So yang is describing like everything that is needed to keep our body active, going, alive, and properly functional. So it's a very inclusive kind of concept. It can include a lot of different things. Whereas yin is like the structure. So if you were to die, you would just have no yang, but you still have yin. You still have your structural body. Your corpse kind of is there, and it's now not a body anymore. It's just a corpse. It's just an empty shell. So technically, that's all yin with no yang, right? And your spirit kind of, if you kind of adhere to these ideas, if you have a spirit that lifts out of your body, if you think about that, well, that's all yang with no yin because there's nothing kind of attached to it. So how we think about things in Chinese medicine, one, it's very metaphorical, which is kind of nice. And it's very story-based, so we can kind of think about things like that. But it's also categorical or categorization of things, and it's not just sort of like it's this exact thing. So you can't just put your finger on it and say that's yang, and So the idea of yang being function is like how much yang you have depends, or how much function you have depends on how much yang you have. So what can happen is over time our bodies deteriorate, obviously. And one of the ways to think about that deterioration is lack of function. And so one of the ways we deteriorate is through damage to our body from the environment, right? From cold. And that's what Zhang Zhongjing was talking about in this text. Now, he didn't just write one text. He has two texts. That first text, he talks about all the damage and all the things that can happen from the environment. And the second text talks about, well, what about if people don't have good sleep, or they don't have good eating, like good diet, or they have too much sex, or they don't have maybe don't have enough sex, or they don't have enough emotional support or things like that, and their emotions get out of control, or from childbirth, or from these things that are considered taxation. So they're kind of that's a big separation in Chinese medicine, to have these two aspects of how we can get sick. So every one of us is in contact with the environment all the time. Now, some of us are in contact with more extreme environments, and some of us have more shelter or more protection from the environment than others. And then you also are just going around the world with your constitution, how you are, like how you were born, and that's your genetics. And in TCM, they think of that as your jing, or your essence, right? And who you are means that's how resilient you are to the environment. One way of thinking about how you get sick is that all illness is an imbalance or an inability of our body to cope with the outside environment. So let's say I go outside and it's really hot. then I need to have lots of layers on so that I can take my clothes, well, not all of my clothes off, but some of my clothes off. Otherwise, I'm going to overheat. I'm going to feel too hot. But my body actually has a mechanism that stops it from overheating, and that's where homeostasis comes in. So it's good that I can sweat. If I go into a really hot place, I need to be able to sweat, and that's where I become very ill if I couldn't sweat. But also, likewise, cold contracts, right? And when things contract, then they're not functioning as they properly should do, and they start to die. And that's kind of what happens when you have this cold damage. Now, it starts with Tai Yang, right? So everyone's, if you're born and you're healthy and you get sick, you get this fever and you get this kind of Tai Yang condition. That's like the first 1 or 2 days of being sick with a cold or a flu or this kind of outside environmental illness. Now, bear in mind that this system was developed before we knew these names of these things. They didn't know influenza. They didn't know even like virus names or anything like that in the Han Dynasty. They just could see, obviously, people were getting sick, and it was very obvious to observe, hey, this person went out in the environment and this happened to them. Now, what's in the environment isn't just cold, it's not just the wind and the actual environmental things, but that is actually how we transmit disease, right? Cold and flu and viruses and particles and bacteria and things like that are in the environment. So you can think of it how, it makes complete sense that, the Han Dynasty and Zhang Zhongjing was talking about, well, cold will make you sick, but it's not really just the cold. It's like what's in this environment, what's breeding in the environment is actually what's making you sick. It's not like the wind itself, right? So anyway, maybe also another video. Let's get to the Shaoyang, Marie. So what is this chronic Shaoyang? So you get sick in different layers, right? And if you are healthy enough, you'll just bounce back to having all your yang again. But if you're not healthy enough, it's almost like that causes like let's say a chink in the armor, right? So let's say you're a soldier. I often think of this idea of like when you're first born, you've like got all your armor, you've got all your protection. And of course you get sick, but you bounce back quickly because you've got that protection, you've got that armor, you've got that strength in you and that resilience. But then let's say you've been in a few battles and you're a bit weary, you're a bit tired. And you can't bounce back as quickly, and especially if that person's just thrown back into the fight again, they don't have the resilience. And how that can play out sometimes for us could be our diet, our lifestyle, our sleep. Like you just haven't been able to recover properly. The severity of it, like if you're a soldier, every single fight you fight, like I'm thinking about back in the day where they'd have those like jousting sticks or different kinds of like a sword or whatever. Like not every battle's going to be the same. Some people you fight are stronger than others. Sometimes there's 5 people to fight. Sometimes there's 1 person to fight. So that one soldier, every day when he goes out and does battle, he might not necessarily encounter the same thing. And it's exactly like that with illness. Like every time you're exposed to different illnesses in the environment, different bacteria, viruses, bugs, and different levels of the environment, one is it's got to do with how strong our body is, how resilient our body is, and also how much of that is bombarding us. So this idea that we kind of chip away those levels. And so when you get sick, let's say you're a healthy person, you go from Tai Yang, then your next level is Yang Ming. And that's when your body kind of heats up a bit and goes, okay, we need to kind of fight this cold, because cold's contracting. And then you need to kind of heat up a bit. And to expel that pathogen, you're going to create a fever. And that's actually what you should be doing. You should be getting a fever. Now, as we get older, people become less and less able to get a fever. This is something that really struck me as interesting when I was studying Chinese medicine, the idea that you're healthy if you can get a fever, like you're actually healthy to be able to get sick. Think about little kids, right? Little kids get sick really easily. And so just bear in mind that this is a different system of medicine. I just better say that again. But think of a little kid, right? When little kids get sick, they get really high fevers, because in Chinese medicine we think that the reason for that is they've got a lot of yang. They can get a high fever. They get sick very quickly, but they can also get well really quickly. And when they recover, they generally don't have this lingering illness. And what is chronic Shaoyang? It can be this kind of lingering illness. So how does that happen? You get this Tai Yang, then you get this Yang Ming, you get this fever, and that's what often kids get, and then they get over it. They might have a little bit of Shaoyang at the end of it, but they generally have enough yang to get rid of the Shaoyang, to get rid of that pathogen, and they don't get into what we call like a yin stage of illness, which we'll talk about in another video. That's not for today. So Shaoyang in Chinese, Shao means little, like it's this little character. So it's less yang. You have the not the least amount of yang, because you're still in a yang situation of your illness. You're still in a yang phase of your illness, let's say. You still have yang, but you have the least amount of yang of those 3 yang stages of illness. Whereas you can then get sicker, or you can get worse, and your body's yang then starts to get really depleted, or more and more depleted. So chronic Shaoyang can happen to people who are very depleted, and they can still manifest this kind of Shaoyang thing. But it's really interesting to kind of think about what it is, because it can fit into so many different kind of illnesses that we see. And the good thing is there's a lot of Chinese herbal formulas that are kind of used to treat that Shaoyang like illness. So what is it? It could be things that are just coming and going regularly. So, you know, people say, oh, every time this happens, or every time that happens, like it's really cyclical. And so every time, you know, it's not so much even like, it could be like, you know, oh, every time my mother-in-law comes over, I get a headache. That's a cyclical thing, but not so much like that. But it could be that. Every weekend you get a headache, or every... it could be related to your menstrual cycle if you're a female and you've got a cycle going on, hormonal kind of things. And it was seasonal cycles particularly. So in Australia, we're coming into springtime now, and this is where the yang goes from the interior, it starts to come out. And when it starts to come out, other illnesses start to come out. And this is a thing that Chinese medicine kind of acknowledges, that, you know, spring is the origin of these diseases that kind of can just come out with that yang. And so this cyclical nature, where people say, well, every spring I get this, or every autumn I get this, or fall if you're in America, or every winter I get this, or roughly every 6 weeks, or this kind of, it doesn't have to be a regular cycle in a way, but it's like these things coming and going, coming and going. And what's happening there is, the reason why it's coming back again and not completely going is because your body has little yang, or less yang. It doesn't have enough yang to push out that pathogen properly. So it's trying to do that. I see this a lot with people that have these kind of lingering things of colds and flus, or even lingering cold and flu-like symptoms that are part of things like chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, or these kind of things where they might have these symptoms where they'll say, I just regularly don't feel well. Like they might just say, they say like, I don't have a sore throat, but I feel as if I'm going to get a sore throat. And it never quite eventuates, but I feel like I'm coming down with something. I feel like maybe I'm a bit sick. So what's happening there is that your body's raising its yang to try to get rid of what's possibly going on. Like I said, you're going out in the environment, you're touching all kinds of things, and mixing with different things, and being exposed to stuff. And so it's natural to kind of have this immune response that raises up, right, against these things. But when you don't have enough yang, you could think of that as your immune response. You don't have enough response to properly get rid of it. And it doesn't actually manifest into something, you know, really overcoming. But it's like that person will say things like, I don't really feel better. I don't feel 100% better. Like, I just have felt run down, like these kinds of things. And in Western medicine, there's not really any kind of treatment for feeling run down. Like, they need it to become something more severe, something more serious, which, you know, we know it's wishing anyone got something more serious. But it's really debilitating having something that just kind of lingers on all the time. So I wanted to mention this as a condition of Chinese medicine. Like, it's actually a pattern of disharmony to have a Shaoyang condition. And it's something that your Chinese medicine practitioner can kind of help you with. How would we diagnose this? Well, by these symptoms. It's very clear with your pulse kind of diagnosis, what's going on there. So most practitioners will kind of be able to work that out from your pulse, whether you've got like full-on depletion and like your body's really depleted, or it just has this kind of needing to, like this congestion and this kind of needing to use a harmonizing treatment, which is what we'll get to in a minute, what kind of herbs we use. This is where we kind of think of the constitutional sort of formula for Shaoyang, which is, or the representational formula for Shaoyang, which is like a Shao Chai Hu Tang, little Chai Hu Tang. And what is that? Well, Chai Hu is a herb. Chai Hu is a herb. Here's some Chai Hu, in case you were wondering. Who are you? I'm Chai Hu. Anyway, we don't need to do any knock-knock chai hu jokes. But chai hu is a herb, and what this herb does is it kind of helps to regulate that Shaoyang system. And there's other herbs that are used in that formula, Shao chai hu tang. So you have things like huang qin, which is another herb that's like a Shaoyang kind of herb. I don't want to get into too much detail because it's just maybe bore you and you're not really that interested. But there are some herbs in there that help put substance back in you. So in Shao chai hu tang, you have ginseng, which is really interesting because that helps put the fluids back into your body and regulate what's been depleted. And then you have dazao, which is one of my favourites. Everyone loves a bit of dazao, especially my nephew. He loves dazao. But it's a date, and dazao, when it's boiled up, it's very sweet. And so dazao and renshan or ginseng are very similar in how they're working. They're basically putting that fluid and that nourishment kind of back into your body. It's a really cleverly kind of crafted formula, actually. And then you have these pungent herbs in there. So you have like ginger, right? And ginger kind of warms your stomach and warms that area and helps you, one, digest the herbs, but also to like warm that area and that pungent mobilization to kind of help. It doesn't, you wouldn't take this formula and expect to sweat. It's not that kind of thing. You don't go, oh, I'm going to get a fever from taking this. But it does help to open the exterior of your body a little bit and raise things upwards. But the main point of this formula is to kind of gently tonify your yang a little bit, like gently mobilize that yang and help clear that congestion that's there, whatever the congestion is. And that's kind of how it works. It's a really interesting way that Chinese medicine works. And like, I just love it. I love thinking about herbs and talking about herbs and things about Chinese medicine. It's so unique and so different, such a different way of thinking. So, you know, sometimes you can have these strange conditions that really don't have an answer in Western medicine. And there's a way of thinking about things in Chinese medicine that's a different way to Western medicine. So one of the points I want to make about this video is sometimes when you've got these things going on, like a very TCM way of kind of treating this is thinking, well, when you've got the symptoms, you've got this heat, right? You've got a sore throat, you've got this congestion in your sinuses. And before I did classical Chinese medicine, I was using a lot of these kind of formulas. So things like yin chao san or, that's probably the most common one. Other things that kind of clear heat. And you think, oh, there's this heat there, I've got to clear this heat. Well, that heat that your body's experiencing is actually your body's own yang kind of coming to that area, trying to resolve what's going on there, trying to resolve this, attack that's happened from the environment, or because your body's yang has become weak, it easily flares up. And the treatment for it in classical Chinese medicine with the Shao chai hu tang isn't like clearing the heat, although when you take it, those symptoms resolve, so you feel the relief of it, like your sore throat kind of goes away or goes less, because it's just completely treating it from a different point of view. It's looking at it from a different perspective. So it's actually coming in and raising your body's yang to help your body fight whatever's wrong with it. Not using herbs like saying, oh, these herbs are going to come in and treat the heat with the cold natured herbs and clear the heat. Sometimes in China, I mean, in Australia, people think like this too, in terms of herbs, thinking, this herb's like antibacterial or antiviral, or you must have a virus, so we're going to use these herbs because they've got these antibacterial or antiviral properties. That's not actually really Chinese medicine. Like that might be nice that they do that, and it might be, it's kind of like fortunate, coincidental, but that's not the Chinese medicine way of using those herbs. It might be part of how they work, and it's nice from a research perspective to kind of know that. It's like, oh, that's interesting, but then we shouldn't go about using herbs in that way, because then you're losing the essence and the nature of how these formulas are supposed to be used. One is as a full formula, not as individual herbs. But also, I just want to make sure that you kind of understand the difference, because this Shaoyang thing is very common, and it's also often misdiagnosed in Chinese medicine by TCM practitioners who aren't kind of familiar with the classical kind of style. They might think of it as like heat coming all the time. And you can often feel good from those formulas. Like you can feel good from those heat clearing formulas, but over time it doesn't fix it. It just kind of, every time that heat comes on, you've got to take these formulas to kind of clear it. So this chronic Shaoyang is where people are kind of stuck in a cycle of that. Now you can have an intermittent or acute Shaoyang, which would be just like, 2 weeks ago someone came in and said, oh, I got a cold or a flu, I had this sore throat, I had sinusitis, I got a bit of a fever, and now I've just got this kind of, irritable throat, or I just, still feel, well, I've got sinusitis, or got a lingering cough, or, lingering symptoms, and they might even last for like a couple of weeks afterwards. And that's like more of an acute or like a one-off kind of Shaoyang thing. But if that patient says things like, well, I can't throw this cough away, I've had it for years, or this cyclical nature again comes back to haunt you. It's like this kind of thing. Or sometimes people say every time I get run down this happens, right? So it's like their immune system gets low, and that's because they've got little yang anyway. And so when they don't look after their body, they really notice these symptoms kind of flare up, on that cyclical or that regular basis. So I hope this video has been useful and helpful to you. And if it has, make sure you subscribe to the channel, make my dreams come true. And leave a like or a comment. Let me know if it's been helpful and useful to you. Hope it's been interesting to learn about what Shaoyang is and what classical Chinese medicine is all about. You can check out my link below this video. I'm doing online consultations now for people as well. And we can discuss one-on-one, because sometimes people ask me questions in the comments and I can't answer them personally because I'm not your doctor, not your patient, you're not my patient. And, it's not confidential and private on YouTube either, in case you didn't realise that. So if that's something you're interested in, you can check that out below. I'd love to hear from you, and you can contact me through that way. So have a great day. I'll see you again on the next video soon. Thank you.